Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have Katrina Donaghy with us. She's a CEO and a founder at Civic Ledger. We're going to talk about blockchain today and crypto and Web3. One of my favorite topics nowadays. Market is hot, so I guess we're in the right moment to speak about this. This pod is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start your own podcast, scale it, or monetize, you can go to podfire.com. Kat, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and Civic Ledger.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So as you so kindly introduced me, I am the CEO and co-founder of Civic Ledger. So Civic Ledger is a technology company that uses the technology called blockchain to bring trust and transparency to transactions between government, industry, and citizens. So we found the technology a very long time ago, and we found it very interesting on how to actually account for real world assets, which is now a thing called tokenization of real world assets. But we were quite interested in government issued assets such as permits and rights and things like that. And now it's 7 years into the future, and it's quite extraordinary on just how huge the industry is and just how coin. And so yes, you are right, the market is very hot right now. So hopefully we'll start to see again the technology going through another iteration of adoption.
Right. And how did you first get into it? I remember the first time I heard about Bitcoin, it was in 2013-ish. I was an exchange student and I was even too broke to buy like one Bitcoin. I think one Bitcoin cost $6 back then. So when did you first heard about the technology, and when did you knew that it was wow and it had a lot of potential?
Yeah, look, I always people who know me really well or always hear me say that the technology finds you, not the other way around. It's about where you are in your journey, just like you said, in 2013, you saw Bitcoin, which was extremely rare when you think about nobody knew about it apart from a very close set of people who were actually building the technology with Satoshi Nakamoto way back in 2008, 2009. But it's always serendipitous. You've got to be ready, open. So I sort of, and this is a very Australian story, but it's actually quite relevant now because it's going on globally at the moment. But there's a guy called Craig Wright who claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, Craig is from Australia, spent some time in Brisbane, where I live. But at that time in 2015, the Australian Taxation Office was chasing him around Bitcoin, and it kept on getting into the press. And I got quite curious. And then I started going down a rabbit hole, like everybody will tell you their story of the rabbit hole. But ironically, at the time when I started to look at this thing called Bitcoin, I had very small children at that time, and I found a book in the children's library in a suburb in Brisbane about Bitcoin. And I think, sometimes you have to look at that as a sign to say, what's the universe saying to me? I picked it out, I got it out and I read it. And that's when my world changed. I came from government. I spent 20 years in government, grappling with how do we actually bring trust into data? How do we share it across government departments? And we could never solve that problem because we were working with closed information systems. So when I read the book, which I had to read about 3 times because it takes a little while to get your head out to unlearn monetary policy, global monetary policy. And then one of the things that resonated with me so much was at that time, I just finished working in a charity, working in the non-for-profit sector, and it talked about bringing transparency to donations, which was a real big thing for me. And that's when I realized that this was a technology that I had never seen in my lifetime. And as a result, you throw yourself into it. And at that time in 2015, I did a mind map of the world. Who were the thinkers, the thought leaders? And the interesting thing, Charles, was back then there were no crypto bros. It was actually economists, sociologists and economists who were talking, and philosophers talking about this technology from the lens of governance and how it will change society on how we can actually share value with each other. And I knew then that this was something. And there were some serendipitous moments in April 2016, I went to my very first Bitcoin meetup, blockchain meetup, and that's where I met my co-founder. And then there's history after that. But I think it just takes a moment, particularly for your listeners, is that sometimes you just have to say yes to something that you might not know anything about, but you have to be curious and open. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about 8 years later, Civic Ledger is, doing what it's doing with the technology.
And what kept you going? Is it the prospect of wealth when you were reading about it, like, or just pure curiosity, or how humanity changing it would be?
Absolutely, the curiosity and how it changed humanity. Because my university studies is humanities. So even though I lead a technology company, we don't lead with the tech. We lead through the lens of human-centered technology innovation. So it's critical that when you're designing solutions with blockchain technology, which is extremely powerful technology, that you have to keep on saying to yourself, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Obviously, the crypto is extremely interesting as well because of the whole idea of peer-to-peer decentralization. You can see all your transactions on the ledger. But the crypto wasn't the thing that got me going. It was the potential of how to shift society around more equity, access, democracy, and fairness. Maybe a little bit crazy, but that's always been the driver of Civic Ledger. And I think perhaps, you and I have seen a lot of cycles in this industry, from the ICOs, the NFTs, the first bull run, then the crash, all the collapses, all the scams. And a lot of those companies in the early days that went for the money are not here anymore.
Yeah, and I think that the crypto bros sort of tarnished the image for a while. Why do you think these folks came in? Was it like the wealth perspective that time? What happened there? And do
Oh,
you feel that
well,
it affected the full industry?
oh yes, we had a crypto winter in 2018, our first crypto winter, and it was bad. Nobody wanted to talk to us because we were associated with all the scams. But I think you get that in any type of vertical. We see gold, we see casinos, we see money laundering, crime, all that sort of stuff, which is usually associated with fiat, not crypto. But I think, again, when we actually had the ICO boom, that's when we started to see the emergence of crypto bros, and that changed the landscape forever. And everybody was in for a quick buck. So you saw the scammers, but I think anywhere in the world where there is something that people are making money out of, you get FOMO, and you want to get in there and find any way to actually do things to get money. But we now are a lot more sophisticated now, so we can actually spot those scams a mile away. The problem is around the education of consumers, of mums and dads who want to get into this, but they don't know. And I think that's the problem, is that governments globally, I know we had conversations in Australia in 2017 with our regulators to say, look, we need to start to talk about educating the consumers around cryptocurrency. And they came back to us and said, nobody in Australia holds crypto. So what are you talking about? Because in the old days, I used to be associated, I was on the boards of the industry associations that were trying to discuss things with government. But I think on all occasions, you can't point crypto and say we're the only industry on the world that's doing scams. I think there's a whole precedence behind us that have been doing this for years.
Right. And Civic Ledger itself, what is the angle here? And when did you know that you had to jump ship from your old life to starting a revolutionary startup?
Well, I'm a little bit older. So I sort of had a bit of a philosophy of my life that, you only get one shot at this. And if you have an opportunity through serendipity where a door opens and it's really scary, but you have to make a decision whether you want to own your own life and your own destiny and make a change, because everybody has that ambitions of changing the world and stuff like that, which is great, hard work. But I got to a point in my life where I went, you know what, I've done government, I've done this, and I hate it. And I found a whole ecosystem, particularly in Australia in the early days, of people who were as passionate, as driven as me, and I was drawn into that. So I sort of threw off the shackles of indecision and made that leap. Look, I'm not saying that it's easy, even still after all these years. It's still hard, but the technology and my company, Civic Ledger, has taken me everywhere around the world. Like it's taken me to Mexico, Mexico, where you are. It's given me a privilege of traveling all around the world to talk to people in this industry, which I'm extremely grateful for.
And what are the current use cases of the technology?
Of the technology that we're using, well, one of the areas that we started off with, as I mentioned before we even created Civic Ledger, is that we experimented with the issuance of a permit from a government agency to a citizen, and we used the Bitcoin blockchain and colored coin, which was the early smart contract that Vitalik was involved with all those years ago. And then he split out of that and then obviously started Ethereum. But it was that moment that watching that asset get moved without an intermediary between our interface that we designed and the digital wallet, and then seeing all of that on the ledger, it gave me a thinking about, well, what are the applications? And you have to remember, back in those days, you had all the banks wanting to build consortiums and do private blockchains to revitalize the banking industry, which still hasn't happened. But I think what we found so useful was, how do we actually solve real world problems? And I think that's what's kept us going, is that we actually solve real world problems. We don't lead with the technology, we lead with the problem, the hypothesis, and the assumptions. And that's just my training as a humanities graduate, is always focus on what the problem is. But once we actually delivered our first proof of concept, we learned also that the power of marketplaces was the thing that we were very, very interested in. And that led us to doing some work with the Australian government around water markets in Australia. So water markets, water rights, water allocations is something that we do in Australia because water is very scarce. So we need to be able to know who has that water and be able to create a marketplace for those trading those assets. We've done a whole lot of stuff in between, but what's really come clear with us is that our concept around water allocations and water management is where our future is.
So how do you calculate how much water there is in a country?
Good question. At the moment, they sit in Excel spreadsheets and different databases, so nobody knows. But how we work in Australia is that Australia is quite unique in itself, is that we passed legislation in 2000 with regard to the emergence of water markets. So every state government had to create water plans for a particular catchment. And in that water plan is a set of rules and water products and that magic number. So basically, we take that water plan and turn it into a digital representation of that through the lens of tokenization and rules and things like that. It's highly technical, and I don't want to bore your listeners with what it actually is, but we can do it because water is an attribute. It has characteristics. It has authority, ownership, balances. It has rules, which are perfect characteristics for blockchain technology, because blockchain technology is about taking complex workflows that are highly fragmented and put a lens of governance around it that become transparent and accountable. So there's a lot of stuff to this, but that's really on a high level.
Yeah, and there's a great lack of water here in Mexico and Oaxaca, precisely since some months now. The water guys don't even come to our houses. You almost need to bribe them to come here because it doesn't fall. Literally, like there's been no rain since like 2 months. What percentage does water comes back to Earth and can be consumed again? Like, is it a small percentage or?
Oh, we've only got on the world's, like when we think about the world and the oceans and all the water in the world, there's only 3% of the water on the planet that we can use, which is called fresh water. And fresh water is highly contested because it's actually there for human good. It's there to ensure there's where humans survive. That's the highest priority. But we also need to grow food. And agriculture takes 70% of that 3%. And then you've got urban water, industry water, but what we have mostly is leakage. It's called non-revenue water. So even though we've got water utilities, most of the water, like we've got countries, some states in the US, for example, lose about 90% of their fresh water through the infrastructure that they have because they haven't kept their infrastructure up to date. So as we know, as the world has to move towards decarbonisation, water is intrinsically linked to that. So, and most conflict in the 20th century has been caused because of water shortages. So we're at this tipping point now. And I think we're very lucky because we got a head start in 2016 with understanding what is the real problem of water and how do we actually start to account for it and bring transparency so we can avoid conflict into the future. So we've got a head start and we've had to do a lot of work to understand how this actually works. We use global standards, we use accounting frameworks. It's not just about blockchain. I always get really frustrated when people say, oh, just put that into the blockchain. It'll be fine. And it's like, no, don't do that. Because once that data is in the ledger, that's it. It's immutable. And you can put a lot of data on the blockchain and it doesn't mean anything. So you have to do an enormous amount of work before you get to the point of ledgering a workflow into a ledger. And we use Hedera, for example. And then obviously the other things we have to concern ourselves with is the cost to use this infrastructure. Like we can't use Ethereum because we've got another product that's in the market. We've just minted 22 million tokens. If we try to mint 22 million tokens on Ethereum, we'd be in a little bit of trouble. But we were able to do that on Hedera for about 100 Australian dollars because of the way their consensus mechanisms work. But these are the things that we have to grapple with as a company. Even though we can use this technology, there's a big difference between saying it's really cool and commercializing. There's a massive tension. And I think over the years, I get frustrated listening to people talk about who've never built this before, ever built anything with blockchain technology, but sit on stages as experts and say, oh yeah, blockchain can do this and this and this. And it's like, whoa, it's not that glamorous. It's a lot of hard work. Often it doesn't work. And often you are frustrated because you can't deploy because you've got caps on data feeds and all this sort of stuff. So I think sometimes we need a bit of a reality check about what actually is involved in building with this technology.
Is it frustrating to sell to governments? Do they understand like what you're talking about?
Oh God, no. No. No, they don't. Look, I think, we actually the reason why we're called Civic Ledger is because it was 2016, so there was no one around. And at that day, we were like, the early companies either had block ledger or coin or something in their business name to say that they were a blockchain company. And we chose Civic because that was always our focus. I came from government. I thought, yes, I've worked in government. It should be an easy, but no. So we learned a long time ago is that you don't go to government first. What you do is you go to the person who's experiencing the pain through their interactions with government and start with them. But no, governments, no. That is just a clear no. Governments will say, like we saw Dubai come out in 2018, 2017, saying they're going to be a blockchain fueled country by 2020. Where's that? It's important. I think the challenge is again through learning and hard work and a lot of scars is that back in the old days, we had this vision that the whole world would use blockchain as a digital infrastructure layer for moving information associated with assets. The reality is that people are heavily invested in Web2. Can you imagine if we all turned around and said, you're not going to use SAP anymore or Salesforce? Can you imagine going to a big corporation or big government that are heavily invested in Microsoft Dynamics and say, oh, by the way, we don't want you using that anymore? They're just not going to happen. So we've learned now that you coexist with Web2. And we know how now to interoperate with Web2 information management systems, because not all data needs to be ledgered. Only certain data structures need to be ledgered to verify that you're doing what you say you are doing. You don't need to have prior proprietary information. So I think we're coming to a reconciliation or again, another inflection point in the industry is that we're never going to have 100% blockchain on this planet, ever. So where do we start? And what we have to do is we have to meet in the middle. And that's work with Web2 systems, with organizations that are now having to move towards disclosure. We now have standards, interoperability. We know how to do all of that. Let's work with them and help them prove or share their story about what they're doing in terms of what they're doing in terms of good work. I'm not too sure if you experience that as well, or whether you're hearing the same narrative.
I am. Humans are slow to adopt. I was reflecting on that the other day. There's sure early adopters, that's like 1%, but most of humanity goes against innovation. They slow down innovation almost on purpose because they're in their comfort zone, and that is actually big breaks on humanity. If you think of ChatGPT regulations and all of that, I mean, yes, the downside is that the world could be destroyed in a second from now. But yeah, I have a Concorde plane here in front of me, and this
Ooh,
plane, it's out of
yeah.
production now. The Concorde, it seems that it was never really proven that it was less good than the Boeing, yet it was going way faster at max speeds, but it was taken down because us humans were scared and were easily controlled by disinformation. So yeah, I certainly observed that. But with all of that being said, on your side, like, what are your top goals this year? Like, you're traveling, you're doing speaking gigs, you're focusing on your startup. How could you accelerate the adoption of blockchain?
Yeah, look, we're actually at an inflection point. So we just recently launched a product into mainnet. For those people who know blockchain, they know what I'm talking about. Going from testnet to mainnet is always a big thing. No, we've actually just taken a product to mainnet to help the circular economy disclose what they're actually doing, because a lot of, particularly in Australia, we had a bit of a problem a couple of years ago where all the soft plastic waste was getting collected, and then we found that the company that was receiving all of that soft plastic waste, stockpiled it. They didn't do what they said they were supposed to do in terms of breaking it down and turning it into valuable assets that go into new supply chains. So we actually just launched, we've just taken a textile recovery facility here in Australia across to blockchain. They're still working with the Web2 information management system, which I told them to do, but we're actually now fetching data from their IMS every night, which is to verify how much kilos of textiles that they're taking every day. So we can actually see now in the ledger that they've now taken 977,000 kilos of textiles just into their facility. And there's only 4 textile recycling facilities in the world. And this company in Australia is the only one in Australia. And they have goals of basically collecting and processing about 10,000 tonnes per annum. So for every kilo of textile that does not go into landfill, we're avoiding 30 kilos of of greenhouse gases. But all of that information is sitting inside their proprietary information system. So what we're doing now is extracting that, putting on the ledger and showing exactly what they're doing. So that's a goal, is to actually take that more into to really refine that and take that into other circular economy companies that I've connected with. But the biggest thing for us is to, even though it's been years of work, is we actually will take our water ledger, which is our blockchain platform for the accounting and management and trading of water, into mainnet. It's been a long journey, but it goes over to mainnet this year in June. And then after that, our goal is to actually extract Water Ledger out of Civic Ledger and turn that into its own company and put that through an investment vehicle so it can actually go global. Because I think a lot of the challenges that we've seen over the years as well is that the promise of this technology has been so extreme that we still only see proof of concepts. And when there has been someone who has done a pilot, then they do the pilot, then it goes nowhere. Or they come out saying they're using blockchain, then they realize just how hard it is, and then they quietly take all the blockchain out of it and go back to centralized databases. So this is a big year for us. We will take it out, create a whole new company, and scale that globally, because the people that we're working across the world are building and delivering with this with our water ledger technology in other jurisdictions. So it's big and it's monumental, but I think also timing is everything. We tried to do this in 2016 and we had so many doors shut on us. Like, no, we don't like blockchain, Katrina. But timing is everything. I think now the world understands that we need to put a price on nature. We need to value nature. We need to put it onto our balance sheets. And water is the most important natural asset that we have on this planet. And now we can actually show and prove its value. And that data can now be shared into financial markets, so companies can start to understand their water risk.
Love that. Where can people find out more about you, Kat?
Oh, just usual. So we've just got a little humble website, civicledger.com. So that's always, and we usually got the LinkedIn and the X. I'm not really using X anymore. I'm not too sure if anyone. I used to be very active when it was called Twitter, but I'm sort of not too happy with X anymore. So I'm just letting the account sit there. But largely you can find me on LI, LinkedIn. You can connect with me. I'm always open to sharing our journey with people who are very interested, who may be also on the same journey as us and find that they're actually in the same space, but we always see that collaboration is the best way to get scalability. We don't see our fellow blockchain people, startups as competition. We see them as potential collaborators. So often if we come across people who are in the water space or in the world that we are, we always say, well, how do we actually collaborate together? Because often they're solving a problem that we are not interested in solving, but it is connected to what we actually are solving as well.